So, how do you keep an ancient tradition alive in a brand new world? Today, we're going to dive into the mind of a 3rd century legal genius who faced this exact problem and engineered a solution that literally shaped a civilization. But we're not going to start where you think. We're going to start with a question.
An ancient text, the Talmud, asks this very question. You know, it's one of those huge philosophical questions about the whole point of existence. Just take a second. What would your answer be? Well, you can bet the sages back then had some big ideas of their own. See, you had 3 of the greatest minds of the era, and they each came up with a totally different answer. One said the world was created for King David, the man of prayer and repentance. Another said, no, it was for the future Messiah, for that ultimate redemption. And a third said the world was created for Moses the lawgiver, for the law itself.
And the sage who gave that answer, the one who saw the entire purpose of creation revolving around a system of law, was a man named Shmuel. And this just perfectly captures who he was. For Shmuel, the law wasn't just a bunch of rules. It was the entire point. But believe me, Shmuel was so much more than just a legal scholar. So, okay, let's properly meet the man at the center of our story, Shmuel of Nehardea, a major figure in 3rd century Babylonia. This guy was, he was basically a Renaissance man centuries before the Renaissance. Yeah, he ran a major legal academy, but he was also the personal doctor to the leader of the Jewish people, Rabbi Yehuda the Prince. He was such a brilliant astronomer, they nicknamed him Yarchanai, the man of the moon. He famously said, the paths of the heavens were as clear to him as the streets of his own town. And, this is crucial, he was a personal friend of the Persian king. This was not some academic stuck in an ivory tower. This was a serious player. And you know, when you're a major player, you've got major problems to solve. And his problems centered on the foundational legal text of his day. Okay, so this text was called the Mishnah. You can think of it as the first ever written constitution of Jewish oral law. It was this monumental achievement put together around the year 200 CE, way back in the land of Israel. It was the law of the land. Now, Shmuel's official title was Amora, which literally means sayer or spokesman. Kind of cool, right? Basically, his job, and the job of his whole generation, wasn't to write new laws. It was to interpret the Mishnah, to say what it meant and figure out how it applied to real life. And right here, this is the central conflict. The Mishnah was the law of Israel, but Shmuel was a leader in Babylonia, a different country, a different culture, a whole different world. It's kind of like a country trying to apply a constitution that was written 200 years ago on another continent. How on earth do you make it relevant? How do you make that work? So for centuries, scholars tried to find some simple master key to unlock Shmuel's thinking. They pored over his hundreds of rulings, trying to spot a single predictable pattern. You know, like they were trying to crack the secret code to his legal genius. And 2 big theories emerged. You had the Hoffman theory, which claimed Shmuel was this super strict hardliner, that he always went with the toughest possible minority opinion. Then the Funk theory came along and argued the complete opposite, that Shmuel was a conformist who just always followed the established majority. So 2 simple, clean, and totally contradictory ideas. Well, it turns out they were both wrong. When you take a deeper dive into his more than 130 recorded rulings, it becomes clear that Shmuel wasn't following some simple formula. He was playing a much more sophisticated game. Modern scholarship shows us his genius wasn't a single key at all, but this brilliant 2-part strategy that balanced the needs of the past with the hard realities of the present. And his strategy really boiled down to 2 core principles. It's pretty simple when you lay it out. First, be pragmatic. And second, favor the locals. Let's break down what that actually means. Okay, first up, pragmatism. Whenever Shmuel was faced with a legal debate from the Mishnah, he would systematically hunt for the most lenient or practical opinion. He wasn't interested in some abstract, theoretical purity. He cared about what would actually work for his community, right there in Babylonia. Here's a perfect example of this in action. The Mishnah has this debate about the deadline for the evening prayer. The strict opinion says you have to do it by midnight, but Shmuel, he ruled in favor of the most lenient opinion, which allowed it all the way until dawn. Why do you do that? To make life easier for people. Workers getting home late, scholars studying deep into the night. It was practical. It was pragmatic. But pragmatism was only half the story. His second principle was a kind of local patriotism. Shmuel went out of his way to elevate the status of legal traditions that came from sages who, like him, had Babylonian roots.
He was actively building a distinctly Babylonian legal identity.
And this is where it gets really clever. This principle could actually override his pragmatism. In one case, he had a choice between a lenient opinion and a stricter one from the great sage Hillel. Now, Hillel lived centuries earlier, but, and here's the key, he was originally from Babylonia. So Shmuel sided with Hillel, the hometown hero, even though it was the stricter path. He was sending a message: our Babylonian traditions matter.
So what was the result of this brilliant two-pronged approach? Well, it was nothing short of a revolution. Just look at the numbers. We have over 130 cases where Shmuel's final, authoritative ruling is recorded in the Talmud. That is a massive, massive legal footprint. And he didn't just offer opinions. No, he made declarations. When he issued a ruling, he'd use this powerful, definitive phrase. Shmuel said, "The law is." That's not a suggestion. That's the final word. He was actively translating the old code for his new reality. So by weaving together these two ideas, making the law workable and making it theirs, Shmuel didn't just preserve the Mishnah, he gave it new life, creating a blueprint for how a tradition can survive and even adapt.
You see, he wasn't just a judge, he was an engineer. He designed a system that was flexible enough to work in the real world, but also strong enough to build a proud, distinct identity. He made sure the law would not become some brittle museum piece, but a living, breathing tradition.
And really, this all leaves us with a final thought. Shmuel's challenge from nearly 1,800 years ago is one we're still facing today, isn't it? How do we honor ancient wisdom and timeless values while navigating the chaos of a constantly changing world? Shmuel's answer was a blend of pragmatism and identity. It makes you wonder, what's ours?